God Yule and Io Saturnalia to all of our listeners, and Merry Christmas to the 3 whole Christians who still listen to this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, loyal subscribers, and federal agents spying on me, I would like to welcome you all to a very special, more informal episode of Aristogenesis as we delve into the traditions of the Winter Solstice. My name is Taerus, and I'm joined here by Nestor, whose audio quality does dip quite dramatically. And it's only thanks to Pagan Bookshelf, the Telegram channel, that he was even able to be heard. So thanks to Pagan Bookshelf for that. And Freja, who is making a very welcome return for this episode. How are you guys doing?
We're doing fine, thank you.
Hello. I'm great, thank you very much. And I'm even happier we are doing this episode because we have an important date coming up now on Monday, the Winter Solstice. And we wish to highlight it and hopefully bring new life to this old European tradition.
Yes, this is just a few days before Winter Solstice on Monday, 21st. So we're recording this on Friday. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's great to have you back again, Freya, as well, especially for something this important. Because I know we've spoken about the Winter Solstice a little bit in the past, but obviously it's much more relevant now that we're just a few days away from it. This time of year is the perfect time for celebrating the coming together of Europeans everywhere as we celebrate the Winter Solstice, a sacred date in all our religions, whether we be disgusting northern barbarians, arrogant, bloodthirsty Romans, greedy, pompous Greeks, unwashed Celtic savages, or all too simple Slavs. It doesn't matter if you're an uncivilized country bumpkin pagan who wouldn't know religion if it hit him with a Mjolnir and worships Marvel superheroes, or a treacherous backstabbing Christian who worships nothing at all worth mentioning. It's the time of year that we can all celebrate the same festival at the same time in very similar ways, albeit for different reasons. And in this spirit of coming together for this time of year, it is for this reason that we should all go out and start utterly pointless, irreconcilable arguments with our loved ones over who's celebrating what and how they're going about doing it. But no, that is of course not what this episode is about. We'll be taking a little more of a relaxed tone, if you couldn't already tell by my insufferable British smugness, and we're going to be delving into the ancient traditions of our ancestors. From the Nordic Yule to the Roman Saturnalia, we're going to be talking about how these festivals were celebrated and the reasons behind doing so. We've already briefly spoken of our ancestral traditions regarding the winter solstice in previous episodes, but we didn't have time to delve into how exactly the celebrations went down, nor did we go into how to best restore these ancient traditions in your own homes. And we certainly didn't have the opportunity to explore them in their rightful joviality. To start us off, the winter solstice is, for those who don't know, a celebration of the end of the longest night of the year, typically celebrated around the 21st of December by cultures across all of Europe for thousands of years. It is the rebirth of the sun, the triumph of light over darkness, and the fundamental turning point of the year. While New Year has been celebrated at different times by different people, the Romans initially celebrating New Year in March, for example, the winter solstice and its surrounding festivities is celebrated by all European peoples and religions at the same time, that being late December. As many can clearly see in the modern day, the holiday has become cheapened and commodified, corrupted in the same manner as almost all of the old festivals celebrated in the modern day under one guise or another. But we thought it would be nice to suggest some ways to reintroduce some rather easy traditions back into your celebrations, and hopefully have a little bit of a laugh while we do it. Before we begin, it's worth noting the rather auspicious occurrence this winter solstice on the 21st. The planets Saturn and Jupiter will align. Given that the winter solstice is first and foremost, as we will be covering, a festival of rebirth, for Jupiter to overtake Saturn in this way is really rather auspicious. As the darkness of the year fades and gives way to the unconquerable light, the star of Jupiter, symbol of the Aryan Skyfather, will overtake that of Saturn. Perhaps this is a sign that the darkness of these last decades, last centuries even, will begin to turn back towards the light. The darkness that we have endured will begin to dissipate as the light returns. Not immediately. After the winter solstice, the nights are still long. Darkness is still thick. The light's still weak, but slowly, day by day, hour by hour, the light returns. Perhaps as this planetary alignment comes about, we will at last reach the turning point of the current age. We've already spoken before about the importance of this solar festival and why it was so significant to our ancestors, even long after they had gone down many different paths of their own, forging new traditions and cultures and civilizations. However, no matter how different they seemed on the surface, they all still celebrated this same festival in similar ways, and it still speaks to us now, even if the majority of people have no idea why they're celebrating. We've already spoken briefly about the winter solstice in our second episode, so make sure to check that out. We're going to start off by talking about the December festival most relevant to the majority of our listeners. This is, of course, the festival of Hanukkah. Since, by this point, a sizable portion of our listener base probably works for Mossad, this seems like the best place to start. Hanukkah was the Carthaginian general who invaded Italy during the Second Punic War, famously crossing the Alps with an army of elephants, most of which died on the journey, the rest of which were rendered useless. It is for this reason that Hanukkah begins with the sacrifice of an elephant to the Carthaginian god Baal Hamon. No, of course we're going to start with Yule, or Yuletide, the Nordic and Germanic festival which has retained most of its symbolism and its popularity even into the modern day. For example, where I live in England, and I believe I can say this without doxing myself, we have a Swedish Yule market every year where Swedish meatballs and cranberry sauce are served. German markets are also incredibly popular all throughout England, and despite the unfortunate attitude of the English marking our German and Nordic brothers as foreigners for the rest of the year, these traditions are wholeheartedly embraced and loved throughout the country. Yule, in many ways, has many traditions that are still being practiced even today. The ones that we'll be looking into are the Christmas tree, the Yule log, and the Yule boar. And we will also have to briefly look into Father Christmas, or Julvater, also known as Santa Claus. The Christmas tree has many stories claiming to contain its origins. One famous, or in our view infamous, story is that the Christian Saint Boniface created the Christmas tree when he defiled Donar's oak, the Germanic sacred oak said to belong to either Donar, Thor, or Jupiter, depending on who was asked. This is rather obviously not true, as the custom of evergreen trees being used to celebrate the winter solstice dates back far further than Boniface. It is, when you really think about it, the perfect symbol of the winter solstice, where all other life has decayed and the year with it, the evergreen has stayed upright and unmoved, and now joins us in celebration of the rebirth of the sun. It is also said that the red baubles that are used to decorate the tree are a replacement for offerings of raw meat left out either for Sleipnir, the horse of Odin, or for a race of tiny wood-dwelling elves or gnomes whose name escapes me. But I believe, Nestor, there was a similar folklore tale in southern Europe that you wanted to elaborate on.
Yes, it has to do with a very ancient folklore tradition that has survived in Greece up to our times, and it's still spoken of. And it's about the Hellenic variation of trolls or goblins. And what is fascinating about this folklore tradition is that the only time that the tree of life is mentioned in our traditions. The tree of life having its roots underground, and the tree grows in the human world, and its branches embrace the heavens. So this Hellenic variation of, let's say, trolls or goblins, they dwell underground, and their work all the year round, they are gnagging on the roots of the tree of life in order to destroy it, to bring it down. And they are coming very, very close in the end of the year. And right in the change of the year, they want to take a break. So they emerge up to the world of the humans, and they move around to do different calamities. And at these days, right after the coming of the new year, people are supposed to leave offerings outside the doors to avoid the menace of these trolls. But after about 12 days, these Hellenic trolls will return to the underground and continue their greatest calamity, to cut down the tree of life, or the roots of the tree of life. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm sorry, at that time, the tree magically rejuvenates itself, and the roots grow back together. So the trolls come back to their dwellings, and they find the roots that magically have grown back together, and of course they're frustrated, and they're starting their evil work again, trying to gnag down and cut down the roots of the tree of life. And this shows, of course, the continuation of the cycles in a very allegorical way. And what fascinates me most about this small story is that the tree of life, this very common European tradition, right? This very common European symbol, the Yggdrasil, now appears in one more country down in the south, in Hellas.
Well, that's really interesting because in Roman tradition as well, there are also malevolent spirits that have to be placated on the night of the winter solstice, or distracted, if you want to think about it a different way. But the next thing that we're going to be looking at is quite similar to the Christmas tree. It's the Yule log, which has transformed in relatively recent years from the practice of symbolically burning a log into a type of cake. So, if you want to truly return to tradition, then take the Yule log cake that your mother spent a great many hours baking to perfection and throw it on the fire in front of your whole family. This will not, in any way, absolutely ruin Christmas for everybody. If anyone gives you any criticism whatsoever, simply tell them that they need to read Ride the Tiger and that their feeble plebeian minds cannot grasp the true Hyperborean spirit. In all seriousness, though, it's not a difficult tradition to authentically recreate. All you need is a log and a fire. It's a symbol of burning light, that rebirth of the sun. It is divided into pieces, and a part is burned each night. The fire itself is lit on the ashes of the previous year's logs, which is, of course, symbolic of the continual process of death and rebirth found in all things, and especially in this case, the sun. Any remaining pieces of the charred log that aren't reduced to ash are to be placed under the bed in order to protect the house and its members. The log itself is burned piece by piece over the 12 days following the solstice, the number 12 having special significance in many Indo-European religions, especially when concerning anything to do with the sun. 12 gods, 12 Aesir, 12 Dies Consentes, 12 Olympians, 12 Zodiac, etc. Next up is the Yule boar. This is a rather old practice that's still around in a lot of places today, especially in the Nordic countries. I believe that the practice of eating this boar during the festival of rejuvenation must have something to do with the endlessly rejuvenating boar that regenerates nightly and is feasted upon by the slain warriors in Valhalla. But this is just my own personal theory. I have no idea whether or not it has been said previously by scholars or not. And while a simple Google search would most likely clear up such ambiguity, I will instead state my infallible source. I was there. I remember it. Reincarnation. The boar itself is an ancient symbol used all throughout Indo-European history. It was emblazoned on chariots, shields, and armour, and boar tusks were used to make helmets by the ancient Indo-Europeans for a great many years, especially when metalworking was still rather primitive. It was customary, in days of old, for the people to swear oaths while touching the boar, and seal those oaths by then sacrificing the boar, often in front of their king. While, for many, this particular aspect may be difficult to recreate, what isn't so difficult is cooking some delicious pork and serving it up for your family. It doesn't have to be a lot, and you don't have to replace the turkey, but you and your family could easily make promises to one another and then eat a slice of roast pork. It may not be the same as sacrificing a boar in the garden, but it's a step in the right direction, and it's practical and not too much fuss to incorporate into your plans for winter celebrations. It might sound strange or a little bit pointless at first, but in the modern world it is often nigh on impossible for many people to maintain a truly authentic practice, typically because of practical reasons, one way or another. Another Norwegian tradition I'd like to talk about dates back to the Viking warriors. After their raids on Lindisfarne and other English coasts, Norwegian warriors would rush home in order to watch a strange Czech Christmas film, a perennial Hyperborean tradition maintained by Norwegians even to this day. The final thing I'd like to bring up regarding Yule is the Julevater, now known as Father Christmas or Santa Claus, if you were unlucky enough not to have been born an Englishman. We know that his proper name is indeed Father Christmas, since he still visits England while also managing to avoid all of the dystopian CCTV cameras designed to catch anyone celebrating without their fun license. I used to believe that Father Christmas was an Englishman, but this simply cannot be the case, since ill-behaved children still receive coal in their stockings, and Thatcher has long since closed down all of the mines. Some claim that, since he lives in Lapland, he must be Finnish, but this is also impossible, as he has been shown on occasion as being able to smile, ruling out the entire population of Finland. Plus, the average Finn would not ever be able to pilot a flying sleigh due to their rather strict drink sledding laws. No, the truth is that Father Christmas is a proud German. Who else could so effectively run a toy-making business with such ruthless efficiency, from a secret base in the Arctic Circle, using it to produce strange flying craft, practicing magic, and utilising an entire servile race to bring joy to boys and girls all over Europe? I'm definitely getting banned for that joke. One thing to note on the uniquely English perception of Father Christmas before the introduction of Americanized depictions of Santa Claus was that he never actually was said to bring gifts. Rather, he was thought to be the personification of the winter solstice itself, the mood and atmosphere, the spirit of this most festive of seasons. This interpretation is, in a manner, not dissimilar to those naturalist pagans who see the gods as metaphors and personifications of natural phenomena. One would think that the ideal personification of Christmas for a Christian country would be Jesus, but it appears that something of the old pagan spirit still remained in the Englishmen of the time. It's no secret at this point that Father Christmas, or Santa Claus, or whatever you want to call him, is not a particularly Christian figure. In fact, his whole inclusion into the celebration of the winter solstice is rather odd if we take the idea of Christmas being a solely Christian festival. At the same time as we talk about the king of the Jews riding a donkey through a Middle Eastern desert, with some Persians coming to Judea to give him some exotic Eastern spices, and a festival of misery involving the supposed mass culling of young children, we also have a giant white man dressed in long robes flying around the world from his home in the North Pole, with magic reindeer and a flying sleigh coming to give out joyous gifts and leave them underneath a pine tree. These two ideas are blatantly contradictory, and yet we've somehow come to see them both as existing side by side and see absolutely nothing strange or tonally wrong with these two diametrically opposed festivals. Having these two simultaneous ideas of what the winter solstice festivities are really all about is rather characteristic of the modern psyche of Europeans, who have tried to adapt their own ancient traditions to suit the encroachment of foreign ideas. In this most sacred and most Indo-European festival of the winter solstice, however, it seems that more of the pagan customs survived even to this day. Not just survived, but thrived, kept alive and celebrated in the hearts of Europeans everywhere, who are celebrating and expressing their joy at the rebirth of the sun. Returning to Father Christmas, it's hardly worth mentioning at this point the true identity of this magical figure, as it isn't a particularly well-kept secret. It's thought by many, obviously including us, that Father Christmas is in fact Odin. We could spend a long time explaining this, but I feel it's so well known that it's barely even worth discussing. The idea of Saint Nicholas putting coins in the shoes of children, becoming a tall, bearded man with legions of elves, magic steeds, and a great white beard, putting presents underneath a pine tree in the winter is just absurd. This, like almost all Christian festivals, or at least the fun ones that people actually enjoy, It was a deliberate covering up of the origins of certain traditions that were still being celebrated, even after people had forgotten exactly why they were celebrating them. A group called the Folk Odinist Community have written an excellent piece about this, and I couldn't sum up the point any better than them, without simply just reading out their article. So we'll put a link to it in our further reading section, which you'll be able to find on our Nordisk Radio page. One of the many names of Odin is Yule or Yule Father, and referring to Santa Claus or Father Christmas as Yule Father wouldn't exactly be a complicated thing to implement. It's all about finding little ways to reconnect yourself and your family with the spirit and ideas of the festival as it has always historically been. To reconnect with these ancient traditions and to fully understand why you're doing it will bring us closer to our ancestors in this time of rebirth.
Very well put, Taerus. Thank you. What I would like to remind to everybody is that the foundation of all these festivities, be it Christmas now or Yule and Saturnalia before, it's actually the midwinter solstice, right? That's coming up now on Monday, 11:02 to be exact on Central European time. This dramatic astrophysical phenomenon with immense significance for our people. And I urge our listeners to spend the night out. Spend the night out in the open, in nature, with your friends, with your family, near a campfire. Spend the whole night out and wait for the sun to rise. And as you do that, try to contemplate on this phenomenon and its meaning and its significance. Just this night, try a little bit harder, try a little bit extra to reconnect to the memory and the spirit of our ancestors, right? And eventually in the future, try to make it a yearly tradition, celebrate it and highlight it, and spend it, of course, with your nearest ones. Now, for today's episode, I have decided to cheat a little bit. So I will be reading some important parts about the significance of the solstice generally for our people, parts that we have already spoken of in our previous episodes. Our ancestors lived in isolation for thousands of years in the magnificently dramatic and mystical environment of the Arctic homeland. And as the archetypical structure of the Aryan societies was taking form, a caste of priests and scholars dedicated themselves to a spiritual and philosophical quest, developing rituals inspired by and centered around the most essential and dramatic event of the polar regions, the perennial disappearance and return of the life-giving sun. The solar and celestial character of the culture and inner experience of our ancestors has been their central distinctive feature. Their central deity was a sky father, incorporating their strictly patriarchal and combative spiritual and social constitution. This distinctive character and spirituality has then been carried by them from their ancient homeland to virtually every corner of the earth, and distinguishing them sharply from the matriarchal and earthbound, chthonic and telluric people and cultures who they encountered as they spread out. So themes like the arrival of the invigorating sun and the related principle of fire or Agni, the adoration of the sacred dawn, and so on, only understandable in the context of the remote Arctic homeland, are central in the most ancient Aryan traditions. Only in the Arctic regions can one behold the solar circles in their full scale and magnificence, and our ancestors, in their primordial home in the utmost north, were inspired to partake in the sun's eternal struggle against the lasting polar darkness, on the side of our gods and heroes who were thought to actually carry out this struggle on the celestial and metaphysical levels, and the struggle culminates at the solstices. Now, the solstice as a celestial phenomenon itself, and that as our forefathers understood it, have multiple significance, right, on many levels simultaneously. On the metaphysical level, it symbolizes the eternal struggle of the solar cosmic forces of order, balance, and renewal that we Aryans as a race are a worldly, corporeal manifestation of, against the forces of disorder, confusion, dissolution, and decay, forces that act indefatigably, continuously, and drive the world and the individual into disarray and collapse, if not counteracted. Now, these forces are so accurately portrayed in our mythology and traditions as serpents and monsters and trolls, bandits, witches, and Amazons and Titans. This great anxiety that the long night might not end, the fear that the sunrise will not come, and the great anticipation for the dawn is central in Aryan traditions. Thus, the cosmic event is through the Aryan spirit extended to the spiritual realm of the living cosmos, where it represents the perpetual fight between light and darkness, in which the fight for the light at one place or dimension magically affects the analogous fight everywhere in cosmos, ourselves and the inner realm included. The assignment of such a dramatic esoteric significance to the perennial contest between day and night, light and darkness, the sun and the agents of Erebos, could never arise naturally in the south, but only up in the highest holy Arctic north, where the advent of the sun and the light is crucial for the existence and the survival of man. We can understand now the importance the solstice and the solar cycles had for our ancestors even better, as these minor solar cycles were seen as an integral and more familiar and understandable part of the great cosmic creational cycles, a part they could physically observe and relate to. But our forefathers were not only observers of these cycles, but active participants in this eternal cosmic drama, as they felt it was their responsibility as well to fight along their gods, in a mutual, respectful communion, as Plato puts it, in order to sustain and renew the creation. And their struggle along the side of their gods was against the spiritual and psychological counterparts of the same cosmic forces that erode, poison, and undermine the order of the world, but also our societies and our personality. So our myths are a legacy inseparably integrated with our traditions, and our traditions become folklore and customs that put us in touch, as we practice them, with the same mythical, timeless source of genuine essence and life, the same source that gave birth to our myths. In our people's psyche, winter and summer solstices still bear elements of that mystical cosmic essence and Aryan spirituality, even at an unconscious level. This dramatic astrophysical phenomenon has had central importance for our people, and it was celebrated with religious rituals and festivities throughout the ancient Aryan world. It demonstrates our northern origins, as it is only there our primordial ancestors could observe, receive, and interpret the solstice as a decisive cosmic event with actual impact and significance in their lives. Only in the circumpolar regions can one behold the solar cycles in their full scale and magnificence, which inspired our forefathers to partake in the sun's eternal struggle against the long polar darkness. The tradition of the solstice has been so strong that it was never broken or lost, not even as new foreign religions replaced the old traditions. The winter solstice was replaced by Christmas, and the summer solstice by the day of St. John the Baptist. But these superficial disguises fail to conceal the genuine meaning and the profound metaphysical depth of the solstices. As our people today light bonfires and celebrate the rebirth of the invincible sun, they do so unconsciously participate in this primordial Hyperborean tradition and vigilantly preserve its ancient memory as they subconsciously join the perennial struggle of the solar forces to reclaim the world from disorder, confusion, and decay. There is another reason why I think we should not only celebrate the solstice, but also contemplate on it and meditate on this phenomenon. So the solstice is a more visible for us part of a greater astrophysical occurrence, the cycles of the sun, and it may help us carry our thoughts further up the greater astronomical dimensions, the expanse of our solar system, the greatness of outer space and the vastness of the universe. As we scale up the physical dimensions in outer space, it becomes more and more challenging to really understand the sizes, right? They don't fit in our rational brain. If we dare think even further, scale up even more, in the science of astronomy, we meet expressions like the endless universe, with no actual physical boundaries or even limits. Does the universe and the vastness of space end somewhere, and what lies beyond? I don't know, nor do astronomers, to be honest with you. They are speculating in scientific, rational terms, because that's how they think. But who knows? Maybe in the outer limits of universe, the dimensions of space and time get all mixed up like in a black hole. And this is my point. The study of the universe from a scientific, astrophysical point of view, or even the observation and contemplation upon the universe by us, non-experts, hopefully at the night of the solstice, near a fire, gazing upon the shining stars, is one of the easy ways for us to challenge our rational and analytical intelligence, challenge it with concepts that lie on the boundaries of the physical and the metaphysical, on the boundaries between the mortal and the divine. There is no cognitive way for us to comprehend the fact that the universe is limitless. No matter how well we write down our mathematical and astrophysical theories, no matter how smart we think we are, the scale of the universe, and that is great, because the mysteries of the universe, the mysteries of the cosmos, the mysteries of life are unfathomable for the purely intellectual analysis, and the sooner we realize that, the better. Then we may get a chance and a motivation to try to develop our intuitive perception, to see, to perceive directly, without the interception of our rational minds. This is exactly what our traditions, our myths, specifically can do. Symbols and allegories that can become shortcuts. They can bypass our intellect, our rational thinking, and evoke a direct recognition of higher truths and eternal principles, which are otherwise ungraspable to our intellectual thinking process. I know we get a little bit out of track here, but I want to continue just a bit more. Many sciences have met the limits of rational, analytical thinking, but they do not follow the road beyond. Let's take physics, for example. As astronomy scaled up and out and met the limits of the outer world, the universe, the macrocosm, physics scaled down and broke the traditional limits of the microcosm. So about 120 years ago, scientists discovered the subatomic world and tried to understand it by the new science of nuclear physics and quantum mechanics. Up until then, the traditional physics with origins to the ancient classical philosophers like Democritus claimed that the building block of life and all the creation is the atom. But it isn't. It can be broken down to subatomic particles. We call them that, but they are not really particles. And in the world of these subatomic particles, nothing from traditional physics apply anymore. Nothing makes sense. Our whole conception of what the world is made of, how it is made, and how it works was completely changed. In that micro scale, energy and matter become indistinguishable. Our perception of time, past, present, and future, don't apply anymore, as these particles seem to overrun our time scale. Even their behavior varies and changes depending on the observer. The great pioneer of quantum mechanics and a true philosopher, Werner Heisenberg, whose books I urge everybody to read and study, described that amazing new world in the best possible way, and I quote, Can nature possibly be so absurd as it seemed to us in these atomic experiments? I think that modern physics has definitely decided in favor of Plato. In fact, the smallest units of matter are not physical objects in the ordinary sense. They are forms, ideas, which can be expressed unambiguously only in mathematical language. The elementary particles themselves are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than a world of things or facts. And he concludes, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. An end of quote. I think a great opportunity was lost about 100 years ago, and with the outcome of the Second World War. The nations and regimes which were defeated had a much more traditional and philosophical mentality, and had they survived or avoided the war, they would approach this gigantic breakthrough of quantum mechanics with a completely different, honest and inquisitive way. I think they would have seen it as an opportunity to really understand the mysteries of life and bring humanity closer to the eternal principles of the metaphysics. But the victors of the war imposed their ideas and interest, and instead of promoting this amazing possibility that nuclear physics offered, to understand higher and eternal truths, they deviated completely and turned quantum mechanics into a fun park for odd characters. They turned science itself to the new dogmatic and universal religion. That is, they transformed the instrument, the method to search for the truth, into truth itself. And of course, incapable as they are to escape their greedy capitalistic nature and their proletarian sense of utility and functionality, they are using quantum mechanics in order to advance technology, to build faster computers and accelerate humanity's already frenzied tempo to self-destruction. So think of the solstice celebration as an opportunity to contemplate on the reality of the universe, because it is primarily an astronomical phenomenon. Let your minds dive in these magical metaphysical ideas that wait for you at those faraway boundaries of the universe, and then turn it all upside down and throw your thoughts to the subatomic world and explore the same universe in a microscopic scale, and let yourselves overcome just for a moment your rational and analytical intellect and sense and perceive the world as our great forefathers did, and of course as tradition dictates.
What I wanted to say, and I'll say it more in depth in a future episode, is that the ancients believed that Jupiter or Zeus moved through all things. It was his breath. That's the noumena or the pneuma, or pneuma, or how is it pronounced in the Greek. But in Latin it's the noumena, and it's ond, I believe, in the Nordic tradition. It's like life force, and it's always in control of the thunder god. It's always Thor or Zeus or Jupiter, and it moves through all things. And it made me think, like, they control thunder, or lightning rather, electricity. It's electricity that makes your muscles move, it's electricity that fires through your brain, and it's electrons that move through all atomic things, isn't it? And there's all these studies into electrons, and they find out that they behave differently when they're being observed. And they're all exactly the same weight and exactly the same size, which is a very weird thing for nature. And one scientist theorized that it's all the same electron moving backwards and forwards throughout time. And that this electron has mastered time. Like, this thing that moves your body, this thing that moves all things and moves throughout, even on a subatomic level, this is the exact thing that the Nordics were calling ond, the Romans were calling noumena, and it's all under the control of the thunder god, the god of who throws lightning, electricity. And we are essentially playing catch-up now. We're calling it physics, but we're essentially playing catch-up to things that people already knew 2,000, 3,000 years ago.
Science is a method for understanding how the world works, the structure of the universe and the laws of nature, a way to seek for the truth. There are, of course, other methods and other ways to follow, and one of them is philosophy. Our ancestors, the mystics, reached to conclusions and truths about the nature of the world that still baffle modern researchers. But they never separated science and philosophy. For them, these disciplines were unseparated, and the closer you come to the truth, science and philosophy unavoidably start to think the same way and even use similar language. And today, science, especially through nuclear physics and mathematics, is entering again the domains of high philosophy. But the scientific establishment doesn't have the right mentality to capitalize these advancements, or even really dare go further. It wasn't only Werner Heisenberg that turned to philosophical ideas in order to comprehend his discoveries and observations. It is a long list of great physicists, mathematicians, and more, who suddenly rediscovered God, or were almost forced to accept a mystical and unknown origin above the phenomena they were investigating in order to attempt to make sense of them.
But I believe Freya also wanted to talk to us about some of the traditions that they have in the north.
Thank you so much, Taerus and Nestor, for your contribution here on the Winter Solstice and the Yule special. December 21st, on Monday, at 16:59, the Winter Solstice will take place. It's the longest and the darkest night of the year, which means that the axle of the Earth, its rotation is the furthest away from the sun at the time. In Latin, the word sol means sun, we know that, and then sistere means it stands still. And the mythology tells us that the wheel of the year stands still for 3 days, the same degree for 3 days. So this is the time when we start our Yule celebration, and we drink in the Yule for 3 days, we say. The symbol for the wheel of the year, or årshjulet, is the sun cross, and it looks like a circle with a cross in the middle, and where the 4 precise turning points of the time and the seasons of the year are represented. So in other words, winter solstice is the December 21st, and then we have spring equinox on March 20th, and summer solstice on June 21st, and then the fall equinox on September 22nd. And the dates could vary a little bit from year to year. So we dress this årshjul to the sun cross with birch tree, and then we put this on fire at our winter solstice blutes that we hold. And in the summer we do the same. We also dress it with birch leaves and flowers mostly. So Norse mythology tells us that at winter solstice, the time of Höder is over and the time of Balder begins until it switches again at midsummer solstice, June 21st. So, and Balder, he's known to be a sun god from Bronze Age. He's called the Shiny One, the Lord, alltså den lysande, eller Herren. Balder, he is the male aspect of the sun, and he's the most beautiful and the brightest of the gods, and he was very much liked by the Assyrians in Asgard. So Balder, he was killed by his brother Höder, and it was Loki that tricked him to shoot an arrow in Balder. Everybody thought that Balder could not be hurt or killed, and Höder was called the blind god. So Loki, he took a mistletoe and he cut an arrow, and he told Höder to aim at Balder, and he was killed. And everybody were very, very, very sad. And in the prose Edda Gylfingaginning, is a story about Odin, who's called the Hellblinder, and Hermod, who is the son of Odin, and he was also the brother of Balder. They ride on Sleipnir to Hel to try to make the goddess of Hell resurrect him or bring him back to Asgard. Odin and Hermod rode to Hel, and they could see Balder sit in the most honorable seat. And they asked the goddess Hel if they could bring Balder back. And she said it was not possible because all things dead and alive will have to weep for him, for Balder. So Balder had to remain in the underworld, or in Hel, not to emerge until after Ragnarök, when the earth ascends again from the sea with green and ready to harvest fields. But it's interesting to see that we still celebrate with the mistletoe at Christmas time. It's part of Christmas time, very much connected to Odin, as a matter of fact. And it was Loki that made the arrow that killed Balder. So we know that Balder is the son of Odin and Frigg. And who is Jultomten, the Yule father? Well, that is Odin. And Odin's name is even Julir. He has many names, but his name is Julir. And Julir, it comes from the word Jul. And that means wheel. The whole celebration is about a wheel, the turning of the wheel. That's why we have the word Jul. In Swedish, that's a wheel. And we have the julegranen, the Yule tree, and that symbolizes the evergreen world tree Yggdrasil. And it's decorated with the sacrificial gifts for the Yule people, both hanging in the tree and under the tree. And we create magic in our dwellings. All the senses are involved. We have the Yule tree, the Yule ham, the porridge, the presents, the Yule goat, and we raise the horn, and we drink beer, Yule beer, and snaps and mum and mead, and we say skål or ofta la göra, which means äring och arvegods tillhör odalbonden, ofta la göra, i vår sinnade juletid. We toast for honor and peace, that's what it means, and for a good annual growth during the coming year of the wheel. It is so funny because in the Old Testament, the Abrahamic religion speaks about our Yule tree in Jeremiah 10:2, and it says like this: "Learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are in vain. For one cuts a tree out of the forest, and they work with their hands as a workman and with an axe, and they bring it in, and they deck it with silver and gold, and they fasten it with nails and hammer, and so that it cannot move. And the tree stands upright like a palm tree, and it cannot speak, and they must carry it because it cannot walk. And do not be afraid of the heathens; they cannot do any evil, and they cannot do any good either." That's such a funny, from Jeremiah 10:2, and the description is exactly what happened today, more or less. Anyway, we go on now a bit about Norse cosmology, because there's so much happening in the heavens, obviously, in the cosmos at this time, winter solstice, at Yule. The father of the sky, the concept of the father of the sky is Mundilfari, and it means the one who's moving according to particular times. He is the father of Sol, or Sunna, and Mani, the moon. And the myth says us that the goddess Soldisk was driven on her chariots by a horse during the day, and then descending in the west, where she put it, or the disc was put on a ship on the ocean until dawn, and then again it was put on the chariot and was lighting up the world. And the sun chariot, the Solvagnen, was called Alfredull, and that means she lights up the worlds. She is considered to be an elf being, a human-like supernatural being that shines with magical powers. And the word elf is found throughout Germanic languages and have originally meant white being. So the goddess Sol also, she was married to Glen, which means the opening in the clouds, and they got a daughter, and she will not be killed in Ragnarök. She will sort of take over after Sol and Mani are devoured by wolves at Ragnarök, and the sun is blackened and cast from the sky down to the earth and into the sea. And so then the greater cycle of Ragnarök, of Gudarnas skymning, it's starting all over again. It's also a big wheel that turns and starts all over again. There is the fine artifact from Scandinavian Bronze Age found in Denmark 1909. It's called Solvagnen, the sun chariot, from 1400 BC. And the Solvagnen illustrates this idea that the sun was drawn on its eternal journey by a divine horse. And this artifact is displayed on National Museum of Denmark. I would like to mention a few runes that we uphold at Yule time, so to speak. And one is the Jara, the number 11, Ärings- och fruktbarhetsrunan. It's the fertility rune, and it stands for the annual growth in the year's cycle. It's a balance rune between the polarities, light and darkness, night and day, Balder and Höder, and so on. A Nordic equivalent to yin and yang, the meeting between the light and the dark. And Algis, number 14, is called the Elk rune, also life rune. It's supposed to be an Old Norse constellation of Kalavagnen, which was placed in the way of the sun's rising, and the elk and the deer symbolized Balder and Höder. And it also shows the perfect polarities between the light and darkness. Another rune is Dagas, number 23. It's the rune for the dawn, the new dawn, the daylight, the day. Balder is risen, right? And Lux shines and transforms us. And Aryan people are actually called the walkers of the dawn. We are the people of the dawn. I'd say this is one of my favorite runes, the dawn, Dagas rune. There is a saying that the runes were the first language from ancient Hyperborea, and that the Phoenicians were very much inspired by the runes when they created their alphabet. And the Old Norse word for rune or runa is secrets or mumbling mysteries. The runes are divine, and there's also another saying that they were lost in the catastrophe of our homeland, Hyperborea, but discovered again by Odin upon the world tree Yggdrasil, where he was hanging there for 9 nights. So the runes, they possess magical powers and also allows us to overcome the involution that we are in right now. And the year of the wheel ends on the rune row with the runa Fe, and that is number 24, and it completes the year cycle. And it represents livestock and wealth and heritage. So, what do we do the 21st of December, when it's the longest and darkest night of the year, and we start our Yule celebration? The mythology tells us that we're supposed to go down into the underworld for 3 days and to drink the mead of wisdom and meet the lady of the mead, and we shall be served by Valkyries, and they shall serve us the elixir of life, or it's also called the mead of immortality. It's a metaphor for meeting ourselves and taking the time to go into the dark corners of our being and find valuable wisdom about both ourselves personally as well as collectively, and also about our forefathers and our gods. The great psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, he called this process the individuation process, in where we take a look at the shadow self and stop projecting it out towards others, and we become a whole individual. It's sort of a mystical death from ancient mysteriousness, and it's an initiation rite, really. It's a process, it's a big work on our personality, both individually and collectively as well. This ritual, or this process, is when Aryan noble people becomes born again. They are twice born Aryans. So with that, I will just end this little talk on the winter solstice and our Yule celebration. And thank you so much. And now I'm curious to see what you think, or what you have anything to add or so. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I thought was interesting is you said about the runes. There's a lot of sort of scholarly debate on how old the runes are, but it's very interesting to me because the runes are, if you look at the way that they're designed, they're all straight lines. And this is because they were meant to be carved. They were supposed to be carved into things. It wasn't just like an alphabet in the way that we use it for keeping track of things. These were very powerful symbols that represented things. So they were made to be carved. And if you look as well, it's very rare that you see lines that are kind of opposed to one another sort of horizontally. And the reason behind that is a lot of people think that they're supposed to be carved into wood. And wood obviously has a grain. So it was to stop the runes from being unreadable against the grain of the wood. And obviously wood does not last thousands of years. So a lot of the evidence of the runes we have are much later because they're carved into stone. So when you say that they were lost, my thought is that not only were they lost, we have lost the original old runes that we had that were carved into wood as they were designed to be.
Yeah. And there are so many sayings about the runes, and I've spoken about this some other time, that before the runes even came into existence as a language or as symbols, the Aryan people danced the runes in the Golden Age. I mean, so that it was the sun that reflected in their bodies, and that energy that it is created. That's how the runes came about. At least there are so many takes on this, right? But that's also one. What do you say, Nestor? Say something about the runes.
The runes. They are definitely what we can call magical. They do contain higher meanings, which are difficult to express in words. They are, of course, primarily symbols, much before they became letters of an alphabet and a means of a basic linguistic communication. And this idea is not unusual. The Chinese alphabet is composed of ideograms that include ideas and meanings rather than only simple letters. I do believe that the runes are a universal Aryan heritage in any forms they appeared. For example, there is a fierce debate in Hellas on the origins of the Greek alphabet. And it is possible that the letters themselves are of a Phoenician origin. But the longer back we go, the longer back we see the earliest forms of the Hellenic alphabet, the more rune-like it is. And this is certainly not a coincidence, but a sign of a common heritage that all European peoples shared from the times before their separation and their great migrations. But generally, the letters, the alphabet, are not that important. It is the language expressed in them, the meaning they carry, the logos. And spoken or written language has its limitations. No matter how advanced and eloquent it is, no matter how much it allows the expression of abstract concepts in accuracy and depth, there are higher ideas and principles that no language can reach. And there we need to go in the art of symbolism. Symbols which are not only drawings, but living manifestations of higher realities. Symbols that are connected to these realities they express, with strength to really influence decisively our souls and our world. And I think runes are that kind of symbols. They have the ability, like all genuine, strong symbols, to activate a perception beyond our physical senses, beyond our rational intellect, to bypass our brain functions and speak directly to inner centers we don't even know exist. And this is a skill or a quality we must all train and develop. Otherwise, true knowledge will always be beyond our reach.
I think that is a misconception that a lot of people have. They sort of see the runes as being the Nordic equivalent to the Latin alphabet, and that's absolutely not what they are. But I think it's very interesting as well, because the scholarly theory is that the runes are inspired by the Etruscan alphabet, which was inspired by the Phoenician alphabet. But personally, I don't believe that. But if you look at the Etruscan, they're a very old culture. If you look at Etruscan words and the Etruscan alphabet, their word for gods is Aesir in Etruscan. And they're called, scholars say that they weren't an Indo-European country, but if you see their own artwork, they're often depicted with very pale skin and bright blonde hair, even in their own artwork that they've made of themselves. And there are a lot of words in common with the Norse people, and I think this idea that people were just playing Chinese whispers with an alphabet, I think is ridiculous.
I know that another maestro that I am very fond of, Miguel Serrano, who says that the runes projected in our mind have atomic power. That's pretty much,
Now I think we are getting a little bit out of track here, and I want us to make a U-turn and return back to the solstice. So, dear Freja, how are you going to celebrate the solstice?
How am I celebrating it on Monday? You know what? I would have loved to spend a night out, but I honestly have no plans. I don't know who I would do it with either. I don't dare to be in the woods all by myself.
You can follow the contemplating or meditating approach on the day. And maybe that will work for you, Taerus. Do you have a lockdown there now? Are you allowed to go outside?
We're allowed to go outside, yeah. Where I am isn't a big city, so it's mainly the big cities that are locked down. I have to confess, I'm slightly bastardizing things because I'm celebrating Yule and Saturnalia sort of simultaneously, and I'm trying to keep within the traditions of both, much to the horror of people on both sides, presumably. But it's virtually the same thing. I mean, both, as I'm going to talk about Saturnalia, both involve decorating the house, putting up an evergreen tree, spending time with your friends and family, and venerating the sun. So it's just different, slightly different interpretations on the same things, essentially.
We call it sitting out, we call it utesittning. I mean, that is something that I have done it partly, but not for a whole night. But I really would love to do that. That would be good, You are good at this, Nestor. Explain what you do when you do that, those kind of things. I don't know what you call it, but yeah.
How I will celebrate the solstice. Well, I'm happy to say it. I have succeeded into incorporating the solstice as a festivity in my life for many years now. In the younger years, we used to go out with comrades and friends, usually on a summer out in the nature, preferably in high altitude, up in the mountains, if not possible anywhere in the forests, and spend the night out near the fire. But now that I'm older and children have come into the picture, so we try to spend together with the family and especially the children the night out near a campfire and speak about interesting subjects. But what is fascinating about this night out, in the late hours of the night, right, regardless how many friends you have around you, regardless how many close people, your family you have near you, this contemplation, this meditation comes a little bit automatically. You know, you start thinking, deeper thoughts come in your heads, heavier thoughts sometimes. So I would urge everybody who do this to embrace these thoughts, you know. Take a book with you, read some quotes from a favorite philosopher, you know, read something that's interesting, or dive into these thoughts and try to cultivate them and make something of it. And of course, our comrades in the movement also celebrate this day, and we urge even more to celebrate and spend the night out. And we hope to remake it an established tradition, you know, voluntarily, hopefully first. But Freja, I must say, I was a little bit surprised about the mistletoe. You know, I had missed that connection between the mistletoe as a symbol of the celebrations of Yule and its controversial appearance in the Nordic mythology.
Isn't that nice? Yes.
Yeah, it's in the Celtic and the Roman traditions as well as the mistletoe. It was the most sacred plant for the Druids because it grew on the oak, which is the tree of the Skyfather. So they would take the mistletoe, and it was seen for its life-giving and regenerative properties. And it became seen as like a fertility symbol, which is why people kiss under the mistletoe. The Romans did it, the Celts did it, and we still do it today. And it's nice that even after all of this erasure of our traditions, there are still certain things that are still so strong, they speak to us as Europeans, and we're still not entirely sure why.
But in order for anything to speak to you, as you describe it now, Taerus, it really speaks inside your soul, right? It resonates, something deeper. Your thoughts must somehow stand still. You must take a step back in your life and in your everyday. And you must actually think and try to contemplate a little bit. You know, you may think about everyday problems or the higher philosophical issues, but it takes a self-reflection. That's a very important issue that people miss today. You must actually look yourself, not literally, but in the mirror, and try to search yourself a little bit. It's important. It's also a process of building a character. And we keep saying in our podcast, you know, we must realize the archetypes of our people, but we must recognize them first. And the traditions this way it's a helping hand. They actually guide us on the right direction. So that's another reason why we should follow them and practice them lively and enthusiastically.
Yeah, and I think as well, as you say, you need to look inside yourself and contemplate these things. I think that fits rather nicely into this idea of death and rebirth, and this kind of looking inside yourself, as Freja said, become twice born. I think that's a very important thing. And I think this is just speculation, but I feel like New Year's resolutions are an extension of that, this kind of looking into yourself, the death of the old self, the birth of the new self, and it all coincides with the winter solstice, with the death and rebirth of the sun and the light. And I think that it's fascinating that we still do this, and this, it's not even looked on as an ancient tradition. It's something modern and still, it's almost trendy. It's awful to use that word, but it's still seen as something very current, something very perennial. And I think that's an excellent sign for the future.
Yeah. It's a bit funny about the New Year resolutions, because usually people have very difficulty to escaping the small trivialities of life, right? Because the orientation is quite mistaken on the wrong path, and they end up, I must lose some weight, I must go to the gym, you know, all these trivialities, this simplicities, because it takes courage to make real changes.
Yeah. As I say, it's also the worst time of year for anybody who goes to the gym regularly. Because you go in the first week of January and you can't get on any of the weights. It's just full of people who are only there for the first 2 weeks. Yeah.
So I have a point.
Yeah.
So it wasn't only my idea, it actually happens like this. Yeah, it's like quite interesting, yeah.
Well, before we finish, I'd just like to talk a little bit about another rather ancient Indo-European Winter Solstice festival, one that was celebrated by the Romans. In fact, the Romans had a great many festivals around this time, some with rather confusing histories behind them. Really, it can be said that a lot of our modern ideas of Christmas are a cross between the Nordic and the Roman celebrations, which both had elements in common with one another to begin with, and then given a rather thin veneer of Christianity. First of all is Dies Natalis Sol Invictus, the birthday of the unconquered sun. We've already spoken about it briefly in episode 2, but tragically little on the ways in which it was actually celebrated remain, partially due to how secretive many of these mystery cults were. However, we can, given the lack of information, guess that those celebrating this festival merely joined in with the celebrations of the other Winter Solstice festival that was happening at the time. This was probably the most famous of the Roman Winter Solstice festivals, Saturnalia. Now, Saturnalia is an interesting festival, as Saturn is a rather interesting deity. Even the Romans themselves were not entirely sure what Saturn was all about. To some, Saturn was the ruler of the Golden Age, a just and benevolent ruler whose coming would herald the birth of a new Golden Age, and some have connected the name Saturn with Satya, as in the Satya Yuga, which again corresponds with the Golden Age. To others, Saturn was a monstrous and terrifying being who attempted to devour all of the gods, failing to devour only Jupiter, who rose up and overthrew Saturn. Saturn was equated by the Romans with the Phoenician god Baal, meaning the Lord, to whom the Phoenicians, a Semitic people, were known to have sacrificed children. It's rather interesting to note the opinions of Tacitus, who says that the ancestors of the Jewish people, who Tacitus had a particular disdain for, were expelled from their home on Mount Ida in the company of Saturn, who he believes to have been their highest god for a number of reasons. We'll give you the link to read his thoughts on the matter in our further reading section. 109 countries, the moon, and Mount Ida. Fascinating. Whatever the true identity of Saturn is, can never be truly known from simply reading the history books, since Saturn was already being worshipped in Italy before the Romans had even arrived, so we could hypothesize a pre-Indo-European worship for Saturn, especially since he is associated with agriculture, something not practiced by the invading pastoralist Indo-Europeans. He's thought to have been worshipped first by the Etruscans, who were a non-Indo-European people, whose culture and religion were somewhat influenced by the Indo-European peoples, but were generally looked down upon by their Indo-European neighbours, who regarded them as being rather effeminate, having a lifestyle and culture far less patriarchal than the rigid systems of the Indo-Europeans. It's my theory that since Jupiter is the Indo-European skyfather, and his worship was brought to Europe by the invading IE peoples, then Saturn may have been one of the highest gods of the people who dwelt in Europe before their arrival. This may have been a time looked upon through rose-tinted nostalgia glasses by the newly conquered peoples, who had not known much in the way of the type of total warfare employed by the chariot-riding invaders. And so their old lifestyles of peace and decadence may have been looked back on as a bygone golden age when Saturn ruled, rather than the skyfather of the Aryans. Eventually, the aristocracy of Rome would also enjoy these celebrations, merging the ideas with their own festival of rebirth and light, and leading to all of this confusion. After all, Saturn was worshipped differently to the Roman gods in manners, traditions, and rites that were typically seen as quintessentially un-Roman. But this is only my personal theory and obviously is rife with speculation. At its core, however,
The Saturnalia wasn't so much about Saturn as it was about the return of the Golden Age, which is fitting for a festival celebrating the return of the light. And as we've mentioned, the planets Saturn and Jupiter will be aligning during this Saturnalia festival, perhaps another sign that the current age of darkness and decadence is coming to an end, as we, the descendants of the Indo-Europeans, return to our natural worship of the Skyfather, Deus Piter. So, we've spoken about what exactly Saturnalia is, but how exactly was it celebrated? Well, first off, people were expected to wear a type of hat called a pileus, which I would be wearing right now, had mine arrived in the sodding post. If you're watching this on our YouTube channel, we'll have an image up so that you should be able to see how much it really does resemble your typical Christmas Santa hat that's still worn to this day. Some theorise that the origin of that famous Christmas hat is the Roman pileus, which had evolved from being a white, egg-shaped hat that was supposed to symbolise the hatching of a slave into freedom during a ceremony, but later evolved into a floppy red hat that all citizens would wear over the course of the Saturnalia. The reason for this was to symbolise the freedom of all those celebrating as they were released from their slavery to the dark winter months. The Romans, for most of their history, were really only very good at two things, farming and warfare. Everything else was kind of an accessory to one of those two things, and neither of those were particularly fun during the harsh winters. Saturnalia was seen as a time when the Romans' harsh social regulations could be relaxed, far from the degeneracy that Hollywood portrays, or the degeneracy of the late Empire. The Romans during the Saturnalia would allow their women to partake in such debaucherous, scandalous things as drinking wine, and allowed themselves to take part in such degenerate acts as, and I'm not sure our listeners are ready to hear acts of such depravity, not wearing their toga, and instead opting for colourful and comfortable clothes. It truly is sickening to the very core to hear of the depths of depravity, the heart of darkness that men can sink to. Another trend that anyone in the modern day could implement is the practice of being nice to your household slaves. Maybe give them a break from all the cooking and cleaning they do, and refrain from beating them during the winter solstice. Gambling was also illegal in Roman society, but was allowed during the Saturnalia. However, this typically took the form of gambling games played between friends and family, and would very rarely involve money. Instead, the bets would be played with nuts, and a common gift among the poorer members of society was little bags of nuts that could be used to play these games with. And of course, like any good winter solstice festival, the giving of gifts was a big part of the celebrations. Growing up as a boy with no money, I never really understood how people could find the most joy in giving gifts to people rather than receiving them. But now, as a man with no money, I also find a strange joy in bringing myself to the verge of bankruptcy, buying my friends and loved ones extravagant gifts, like some sort of deranged financial masochist. One odd custom of Saturnalia was that it was seen as socially insulting to buy someone a cheaper gift than what you had bought them the previous year, implying that they had fallen out of favour with you. You were also going to feel pretty embarrassed if you turned up with a cheap gift for someone, but they had bought you something expensive. The Roman poet Martial, known for his sense of humour, speaks of how he only buys people cheap gifts, but excuses this with wit, telling people that since he had spent little on them, he had actually saved them money, since now they didn't have to spend money on him, which is the greatest gift of all. He also gives a list of gifts that were given during the festival, some customary, some rather outlandish. My personal favourite is a parrot that had learned to say "Hail Caesar." Like all European winter solstice festivals, people would decorate their houses and use evergreen plants. Rather than a pine tree, the Romans used a fir instead, but like the Germanic peoples, they would bring them indoors and decorate them for the festive period. Also, like the ancient Germanics and Celts and us today, as Freja has previously mentioned, the sacred plant that was known for its life-bringing and fertility properties, known in English as mistletoe, was hung up everywhere, and this is the origin of a kiss under the mistletoe. The fact that certain rather specific elements of the winter solstice celebrations were common to all European peoples, the Germanics, the Celts, the Romans, and others, cultures who slaughtered one another in their thousands, just shows how important this festival was to the Indo-European peoples. Even after such a long time apart, having even forgotten their common roots as Aryans, even things that would seem insignificant to us today remained identical in these peoples. Surely the fact that over thousands of years of warfare between our peoples and the systematic suppression of our traditions, these things still speak to us, not only as ancestral traditions, but as something current and contemporary and, well, normal, is proof of their inherent value to us as Europeans. It's quite difficult to suggest a way to reconnect with old Saturnalia traditions, as we, for the most part, still partake in many of them. Buying gifts, spending time with friends and family, eating, drinking and celebrating, decorating the house, putting up a tree, kissing under the mistletoe, etc. The only thing that can really be suggested is to put on your floppy Santa hat, make an offering to the gods, and perhaps play some card games or something, and bet with bags of nuts with your friends and family. And, in conclusion, you shouldn't be campaigning to keep Christ in Christmas by trying to remove everything fun and magical about the winter solstice, since these traditions are far older than yours.
But I would like to just finally just say a few words of hope in this time where people are so much in fear, and we what's happening now is just it's so crazy. But anyway, I want to just say that I feel in my soul that the time is on our side now. I mean, we have the runes, we have our traditions. We're getting together like this and comparing our mythologies and our cultures and this great Indo-European people that have so much strength, and the warrior mind and the poet and if we get in touch with who we are, it's such authority. And so this is what these podcasts is all about, actually, just to strengthen our identity, our ancestor, the blood is awakened inside of us, and so look at the future in a bright way. Yes, it's going to get darker, it's going to get worse, but we wake up and just be in touch with yourself and know who you are, and just stand still, and everything is going to be fine, I guess. Just want to, yeah.
I mean, to add to that, this idea that I don't think it getting darker is the right way to put it, but the way I would see it is the sun is reborn while it's still dark. That is the winter solstice. It's reborn at night. It's not going to get bright immediately. It's a slow process of the light returning and the dark fading. And that's the way I look at it. And again, with this great conjunction, this I feel like it's auspicious. This is we've hit rock bottom, and I think we're about to start pulling ourselves back up as the light is reborn. That's the way that I look at it.
It's already happening, dear Taerus. And that's the point also. We partake in the rebirth of our sun by giving rebirth to ourselves. This rejuvenation of ourselves. It's this synchronization of what happens in all the scales, in our reality, in the cosmic reality, in the universal reality. But then, as you asked there rhetorically, Freja, to find ourselves, I had this discussion with a quite intelligent and enlightened friend of mine, and he was telling me, it's not that difficult. Look at yourself. What are your most permanent characteristics? You're a man and you're white. Or a woman, for Freja, and you're white. Work with these ones. It's enough. It's enough to give you all the directions you need in life, just to explore them and try to develop them and discover them in the real way. And that's why in our next episode, we'll be talking a little bit of the masculine and feminine principles, and this male and female archetypes of our race, which I think now it's quite appropriate. It's time to take up this issue.
And that about wraps it up for this episode. We're working hard on bringing episode 6 into fruition very soon. Most of the work was already done, but we had to divert rather a lot of time to this episode to make sure we got it out in time. For any updates, make sure to check out our Telegram channel, also called Aristogenesis. Instagram has removed us in a giant purge, and we recommend you get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. And YouTube is taking down comments too, so Spreaker and Telegram are still the best places to find us. In the meantime, get out there and enjoy your winter solstice, and make sure to check out this planetary alignment too. Until next time, God Yule and Io Saturnalia.